think a lot of people would assume District 6 is a very rich district because it has Central Park, it has Lincoln Center, it has that sort of area of very high-priced real estate. But I think people oftentimes forget that there are several housing projects that line Amsterdam Avenue that also encompass the district.
New York City, and this neighborhood is a lot more divided than people think. And despite it being the Upper West Side and a bastion of sort of liberalism and a place where equality really matters, there's a lot of inequality right here, block by block, in this neighborhood.
We're blessed that we have two world-class parks at Riverside and Central Park here. The city budget is difficult. Parks is never going to be a priority, which is too bad. You know, you would want your city council person to fight for that as much as possible. It's becoming increasingly white, young, family, affluent. There are fewer senior citizens, fewer people of color, fewer single people, you know, artists, that sort of people that used to populate the neighborhood more than they do now.
They have good schools in the area as well. You also have a lot of working class people in this area that live in affordable housing.
Transportation is certainly something we're very blessed to have a great mass transit system on the west side. But, you know, the 3 lines are overcrowded and they're not always running. The loss of mom and pop stores and retail establishments, it is incredible to see sort of the empty store fronts along Columbus Avenue and Amsterdam Avenue. But I think there are a lot of neighbors who want to see making sure their streets are safe and their streets are clean, and actually getting things done.
Real estate rent across the board in New York City is becoming really difficult for people who aren't locked into long-term leases or they don't own their own building. Talking to some people in the district, they're definitely concerned about the influx of foreign cash that's driving up their ability to rent apartments or purchase apartments. I think for people in the housing projects, their issues are sort of the standard issues that you hear in every other district. So the quality of housing, quality of schools, there tends to be a little more crime in those sort of pocketed sections. So many of those housing projects are sitting on prime real estate. For many of these families who unfortunately are in generational poverty, but they're making a living in New York only because they're in public housing. Even though, when you sort of scratch the surface, public housing is not that cheap.
When I talk to residents that's been in this building like 30, 40 years, they tell me it's the same old problem. Nothing changes. A lot of issues in this building. They are afraid to use the elevators because they're afraid of getting stuck. Not even the elderly, even the kids that come in from school.
Preserving a stock of housing for the non-wealthy to keep this neighborhood as diverse as possible and as artistic as possible is central to its character, to its well-being. We're losing people because of higher rents. So that, to me, is a central issue. Locally owned businesses are receding year by year. It changes the character, and it's a loss.
To really make sure that they're representing the entire district, not just the voters, not just the wealthy people, not just the corporate interests, which are, you know, the whole Lincoln Center complex of the Met and the theater complexes and the Jazz and Juilliard and everything else. Little things like that, I think, make a huge difference.
I would want my city council person to listen, to have a good rapport with the residents. Let people know that you're here, not only around election time, that you're there all the time.
Keeping up the legal protections to keep people here and keeping a stock of low and middle income housing is difficult, but that's what I would want my city council person to work for.
The Upper West Side is very known for political clubs and deep histories and things. I would want my elected official to be willing to look at everyone and make judgments that are not just based on political expediency, but also based on sort of what their gut is telling them and what they feel is the right thing to do for the neighborhood.
Rosenthal. When you elected me, I promised to focus on things that would make a difference and be an independent voice at City Hall. It's a promise I've kept. The New York Daily News reports I helped save the city over $600 million by compelling City Hall to rebid a bloated $1.1 billion Department of Education contract. The rebid contracts included many women and minority-owned firms. Because separate is never equal, I supported parent leaders' 9-to-1 consensus vote to adopt the first public school integration plan on the Upper West Side in more than 50 years, relieving overcrowding and concentrated poverty. The plan was endorsed by the New York Times. On the environment, I've received a 100% rating from the New York League of Conservation Voters. Every year, my office serves thousands of Upper West Siders with a focus on affordable housing. Our office brings people together and has consistently ranked top 5 in constituent cases handled. Now I'm asking for your vote to keep me in the council, to keep doing things like this. But there's another issue in this race, and that involves women's voices and the value of women's work. With retirements in the council, the number of women may fall to just 10 out of 51 after this election. On the Upper West Side, we pride ourselves on being progressive, but a city council where only 1 in 5 members are women isn't progressive. It doesn't reflect the contributions and abilities women bring to this city. I hope you'll join Gail Brewer, the Sierra Club, Now New York City, 504 Dems representing people with disabilities, and Tenants PAC in supporting my re-election. Thank you.
Hello, my name is William Raudenbush, and I'm running for City Council, District 6, on the Upper West Side. I'm running for City Council because I like to listen. I like to respond to the actual needs of the neighborhood. When I've been out canvassing and out advocating for parks and helping to stop the mega tower at 200 Amsterdam Avenue, I've learned a lot about the concerns and the needs of this neighborhood. And I do not see any other candidate who's willing to respond and really listen to what needs to happen in order to preserve our quality of life. Our quality of life on the Upper West Side, and make no mistake about it, is under attack. It is being sold to the highest bidder. And that's important not only for us, but for other neighborhoods. Imagine what will happen in neighborhoods like Harlem if we get displaced. They will in turn get displaced. It is important that the buck stops here at the Upper West Side for out-of-place and out-of-context development. Can you imagine more mega towers that barely pay any taxes and burden our infrastructure? It was only 2 of us who helped stop the project initially at 200 Amsterdam, and that's the kind of ethos and ethics I bring to the City Council. I'm running because I want to be representative of you. I'm running as an independent because although I'm a Democrat, I see a body of 51 City Council people, mostly Democrats, who do not at all listen to the needs of their constituents. When you ride the subway, do you feel a responsive city government and a state government, or do you feel the utter contempt for our daily lives and our daily needs? My name is William Raudenbush, and I'm running for City Council District 6 because I want to represent you and you only on the Upper West Side.
Manhattan Neighborhood Network, in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York, the Gotham Gazette, and the Amsterdam News, are pleased to welcome you to a debate between the candidates running for City Council District 6. The winner in New York City's general elections on Tuesday, November 7th, will take office in January 2018. With approximately 168,000 residences, City Council District 6 represents Central Park, Lincoln Square, the Upper West Side, and Clinton. I'm Dr. Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. The candidates joining us today are Helen Rosenthal, the Democratic and Working Party candidate, and William Raudenbush, the Stand Up Together Independent Party candidate. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here. First question goes to you, Mr. Raudenbush. What makes you the better choice on Election Day, and what issues do you think need more attention in your district?
I think the incumbent is certainly a capable council person, but what makes me the best choice is that I have a clear vision. I'm focused on certainly land use issues and how they pertain to the entire Upper West Side. And what I'd like to do is put forward my vision to my fellow city council candidates so we can get in context zoning on the Upper West Side and make sure that we preserve our quality of life for future generations. We're both on the same side on many issues, but it's important that we have somebody that expresses a clear vision. I do not think that the incumbent is not without her accomplishments, but I would like to put forward my vision for what the city can be, what the city can do, and how we're going to solve these big problems that we have that are facing us right now on the Upper West Side.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Rosenthal, what makes you the better choice on Election Day, and what do you think needs more attention in your district?
Thank you, and thanks to Manhattan Neighborhood Network for hosting this debate to get the word out to voters about who the candidates are and what the issues are. I am very excited for a second term. The three issues that I'm excited to be working on are, first of all, women's empowerment. As we know, there are only 12 of the 51 members of the council, should the elections go as expected, that are women. I think women need to play a leadership role and a meaningful role in the council. Second is transparency in government. When we open up government and open up what the details of the issues are to the public, we really learn, and then it helps guide us towards answers. And lastly is affordable housing. We need to preserve our affordable housing. So as the mayor goes forward with his affordable housing plan, which I support, we need to make sure we're preserving people in their homes.
One of the issues that you've been pretty vocal about is education. And so how do you plan to alleviate overcrowding in public schools?
Well, in our district, at the current moment, we don't really see an overcrowding problem. When people apply to in elementary school, to their local zone school, most get in. This year, we did not have significant waiting lists, although there were 2 schools and it took that had wait lists, and it took the summer to thin it out. The real problem is in Queens or other areas of the city where they haven't been building schools, and yet the population's been increasing.
Mr. Raudenbush, do you agree? And if not, how would you plan to address overcrowding in public schools?
Opening up a new school recently was a great accomplishment for the Upper West Side, and I appreciate the incumbents' work on this particular issue. But what we need to do is we need to understand that we're becoming packed to the gills as a city, but especially as a district, and we need to understand that responsible government is not just 6 inches in front of our face. It's what are we going to do about 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. We have a lot of large-scale developments going up, and especially as-of-right developments. If these buildings are going to be burdening our infrastructure, then these same developments need to be providing for the classroom space. So I think what we need to do is we need to tweak the code and deny people certificates of occupancy, deny them at the Department of Buildings, unless they're going to be accountable for the additional classroom space that their developments are going to be creating. It's very difficult and very expensive to build a school on the city level. Just the accumulation of land alone you can see is prohibitively expensive. So let's hold these developers' feet to the fire and make sure that they're the ones who are building classroom space if they're the ones who are going to be burdening our infrastructure.
If I could just rebut on that.
Sure.
I think that's exactly what we've been doing over the last 10 years. Because the planners did not do a great job after the Trump developments went up from 72nd Street down, we absolutely focused on a 10-year plan to open up more space for this district, and I think we've accomplished that.
Well, Mr. Raudenbush, I'm going to start with you then. Speaking of development and expansion, the American Museum of Natural History's Gilder Center expansion. It calls for the construction of a new museum building that would occupy a 1/4 acre of what is now the Theodore Roosevelt Park. What's your position on the expansion?
Well, my position is that ultimately, if you want to put a mini Times Square right in the heart of what I think is a real sweet spot in the Upper West Side, there should be a lot more discussion about what kind of crowds you're going to have, what kind of traffic you're going to have. And I think this is the issue where Helen and I differ the most, because really it comes down to a matter of process. Our elected officials essentially told this neighborhood this project was a done deal on day one. Well, that leaves a huge gap for when, with this huge environmental study that just came out, all the assumptions made there and all the, whether it be the traffic or the pedestrians, were frankly false. And Community United to Protect Theodore Roosevelt Park is an organization I'm involved with that wants to get a much better deal for the neighborhood from the American Museum of Natural History. And although it's a cherished cultural institution, we really don't think it's appropriate to be putting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people on that side of the park, especially with the bike lane and Columbus Avenue already congested as it is. There needs to be a lot more responsible planning, and a lot bigger benefit to the park user.
Councilwoman Rosenthal?
Well, I'm really excited about this project. As I've made clear, this is a world-class institution. This is an opportunity to use basically wasted space that's in the center area of the larger museum. 80% of the expansion rests inside its current footprint. There are now going to be new science classrooms, research rooms, opportunity to access many more of the specimens that the museum has not been able to put on display. I am worried about the congestion issues. I've made that clear since 2015, and it's something that I have continued to hold the museum and the Department of Transportation's feet to the fire on, and we're continuing those discussions, looking into it. I do think it's an exaggeration to say that millions of people will be walking in this new 79th Street entrance, and we have to be careful to talk about the information accurately in order to make sure that we're dealing with the problem in the right way.
Mr. Raudenbush, would you like to rebut?
Well, Community United to Protect Theodore Roosevelt Park, at great expense, hired a global environmental engineering firm to assess this project and make sure that the assumptions being made were correct. And essentially what they said is that the number of people that the museum predicts, 630,000, has no basis in reality, is not proven. That says, based on other projects of this size, yet it gives no examples, it gives no iterations of why that's factually correct. So I completely disagree with the incumbent, and I believe you talk about wasted space. I don't think public parkland is wasted space, and we really need a plan for this park and how we're going to be, and how this park is going to be utilized in the future.
Well, let's continue on, clearly, buildings and space, because that's obviously a hot topic for your district. So, Councilwoman Rosenthal, I'll start with you. The city's Department of Buildings had put the brakes on a plan for the 668-foot-tall luxury condo building in your district at 200 Amsterdam Avenue. But just last month, it got the green light from the Department of Buildings to move forward. What is your position on these superstructures? And if you'd like to sort of continue on from the last question, you can.
Well, just to be clear, when I talked about wasted space at the American Museum of Natural History, I was talking about wasted footprint space inside the current museum. So we, again, really need to be clear about our facts. But about 200 Amsterdam, I'm very worried about this building. 61 stories is completely out of context for our district. The surrounding buildings are about 25 stories tall, and we cannot let this building go up and be precedent setting for other developers who want to build on the Upper West Side. The challenge that the community put forward had to do with the zoning being a mishmash and a misinterpretation of open space. The Department of Buildings has lifted the hold, but they've still not fully explained why they think the project meets the zoning requirements. That's disappointing. I'm not stopping the fight against it, and I continue to be in dialogue with the Department of Buildings and City Hall. I believe it's unacceptable.
Mr. Rosenbush?
The tallest building north of 60th Street is currently planned for our neighborhood. This building represents a vanguard of what the future is to come. If you look at Central Park along the southern border, you see what the developers have in mind for our neighborhood, and it's completely unacceptable. Let's remember that these buildings do not contribute to our classroom space. They burden our infrastructure, and often, because they're ultra-luxury, these people do not even pay income taxes in the city of New York. I completely agree with the incumbent that this is a serious problem. This needs all hands on deck approach, and I encourage the public as a whole to get involved in this project because it represents the first mega tower on the Upper West Side, and certainly have things to come if we don't stop it. Essentially what has happened over the years is that the Department of Buildings, through their various decisions about gerrymandered zoning districts and other zoning issues have ultimately legislated from their position, and they have slowly but surely whittled down the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinances. We need to bring that back into focus. I think that's a great political way to approach the problem without having to go through full zoning reform. And I encourage anybody to get involved with this project, and I hope the incumbent continues to and strengthens her position on zoning reform.
Okay, so I'm going to have one last question on zoning and development, and I'll start with you, Mr. Raudenbush. How would you work to ensure the preservation of landmarks in your district?
Well, ultimately, the Landmark Preservation Commission has appointees from the executive, the mayor's office. And this Landmark Preservation Commission has been a little bit schizophrenic in their decision-making process and in what they have and haven't put on the agenda. Right now, we're kind of holding our breaths because just a few blocks away is the IRT powerhouse, and that represents which could be an incredible mega development, high density. It's supposed to be on the schedule. We hope it gets on the schedule. We hope they keep their word on that. But landmark preservation is a very important issue. But landmark preservation is also dovetails back into zoning, because we have to understand that, whether it be one of the tallest buildings in the city being cantilevered over the Art Students League, or how the amassing of air rights at 66 has taken place, we need to realize how air rights are being moved, how they're being amassed, and what the landmarks laws have to do with the availability of air rights that ultimately end up in things like the tower at 200 Amsterdam being proposed now.
Councilwoman Rosenthal?
One of the first issues I worked on as a council member was finishing the historic district along West End Avenue. And it was an issue that had started, it was a historic district that started around the time that I was chair of the community board, something that I was very passionate about, and worked closely with LPC to make sure it went through as the community desired. It was disappointing that we lost some buildings during that fight, and I'm not pleased that we now have some soft sites along Broadway that could be developed. Landmarking and historic districts are very important tools for us to use to keep historic buildings right where they need to be in order to keep the community in context. I would note, though, that the community also needs to take responsibility when we decide to landmark a building. For example, the church on 86th and Amsterdam Avenue, where the community assured the church that they would pay for a new roof, haven't done so. And so here we are living with scaffolding for a very long time into the future. Thank you.
And would you just define soft spots for our viewers?
Sure. So soft spot is somewhere that a developer could build without any regulatory requirements besides insisting, the requirement that the building be put up safely.
Okay, so I want to continue on with infrastructure, because and I'll start with you, Councilwoman, many of the Upper West Side mom and pop local stores have closed, leaving many storefronts quite empty. And if elected or re-elected, how do you plan to attract and keep small businesses in the neighborhood?
I've been working on this issue for a very long time. It was certainly an issue when I was chair of the community board. It's continued to be an issue. Gail Brewer worked on commercial zoning overlays on Amsterdam and Columbus. The jury's still out about whether or not those have been successful. This is a citywide problem that needs a citywide solution, and I don't think we've heard more than crickets from City Hall, which has been a real problem. Certainly my office has used every tool available to us, working with small business services and the Department of Consumer Affairs to make sure current retail shop owners know what the rules are to avoid violations. But at the crux of the problem, it's these commercial landlords who, with the increasing value of their property, have the right to increase the cost that they charge retail shop owners. That is the nut of the problem, and it's something that the whole city is going to have to face.
Mr. Raudenbush, how do you plan on attracting and keeping small businesses in the neighborhood?
Well, it's important that people understand that small businesses and their survival and their continuing to be in the neighborhood, it's a very complicated issue. and has a lot of angles that you may not be aware of, including how long is a typical commercial lease, or what are the underlying banking assumptions that the developer has that prevents them from sometimes lowering rent. But all that being stated, we need to be very careful about a solution that may artificially prop up rents. In the primary, it was suggested that we take some actions that would artificially prop up these leases and would make sure that these small businesses sat at the current level even when market conditions are pushing them down. We shop differently now than we did 10 years ago. We also spend more money on things like vacations. And when a 20-year lease is up, sometimes there is a vacancy. I would like to see a tax incentive for those who own these properties to put someone in within a 1-year time frame. It would essentially be the same tax incentive they would get if they deducted it. So that's what I would like to do, and I think it's something that's very doable and is not too wrought as the Small Business Survival Act is with legal problems.
Great. Let's move on to infrastructure. So I'll start with you, Mr. Raudenbush. The Upper West Side has suffered from overcrowded subways. How do you propose to alleviate this, and how would you get the financial resources to do so?
Oh, this is my absolute favorite topic in the world. The subways, and importantly our buses, are the beating heart of our city. They're also our economic engine. They're kind of in a crisis point right now, and this problem's not going away anytime soon. The MTA has a debt level that in 70 years will be half of the annual city budget. It's a crisis level. The mayor suggests from his end there be millionaire's tax. The governor from his end suggested that we do congestion pricing. I believe firmly that any revenue source needs to come with transparency. Also, I believe that for our seniors, we need to take a much better look at how we're calculating bus service crosstown. That's the only option crosstown. And people rely on the buses who are mobility impaired and who can't get around. Only 20% of our subway stations are handicap accessible, and those are often broken down. So we desperately need new revenue, but that has to come with transparency so that money isn't siphoned off in Albany to other areas.
Councilwoman Rosenthal?
We have to be very careful on this issue. There is no way that the MTA needs more revenue. There's no doubt that the MTA has to invest in its buses because our subway stations are completely overcrowded, certainly here on the West Side. But the fact that it costs 4 to 10 times more money for the MTA to build anything compared to any city on planet Earth is inexcusable. We shouldn't invest a single dime, whether it's from a millionaire or from a strap hanger, into the MTA before they can bring their costs down. Just yesterday, I stood with the community asking for more accessibility. We asked that as the MTA is working on the L line, having it shut down, there's no excuse not to put in elevators now. They say it's too expensive. That's outrageous.
Well, Mr. Raudenbush mentioned seniors as a concern when it came to transportation. I'll start with you, Councilwoman Rosenthal. When it comes to housing, how do you plan on supporting the growing number of senior citizens in your district?
You know, seniors have to wait on average 5 to 7 years in order to get housing that they can afford. A couple of the senior affordable housing buildings in my district have just that wait time, and it's a serious problem. My focus now, because our district is not one that's considered for mandatory inclusionary housing, is to preserve the affordable housing we have. I have seniors coming into my office every day. They are the most vulnerable residents who landlords who are unscrupulous target in order to free up units for market rate housing. We're doing everything we can to preserve. That's why I'm so proud that I passed legislation to create an Office of the Tenant Advocate. And in my second term, I'm absolutely determined to make that office meaningful and make sure it enforces the 13 laws that the council passed to keep people in their homes. Mr.
Raudenbush?
Well, of those 13 laws that were passed, I have to say that the tenant advocate was the only one that was kind of criticized by the people who kind of do this every day, and I think it's a little bit of a redundancy. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but you know, I don't think it has much meaning if we can't I think it's well stated when the incumbent says that we need to preserve the affordable housing that we do have. Right down the street is it's a building that was originally built by the Jewish Poverty Group, and they have since been abandoned, even though they are, they used to have meal service. They no longer have meal service. But that's just the start of the problems, because a lot of this affordable housing, so-called affordable housing I'll call it, has an expiration date. A lot of the times these building projects will have affordable housing that expires in 50 years, and it's rental affordable housing. One of the things we need to do to stabilize a neighborhood long-term is create purchase opportunities for the middle class. But as far as seniors go, it's an all-hands-on-deck approach again, and it's very important that we not only at the city council level provide these services for our seniors who are being pushed out and to go after these landlords who are harassing them, but also it's very important that we advertise this service and find these people where they are in their homes, because often they don't know about these services.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, just to be clear about the Office of the Tenant Advocate, the only people who are complaining about it are the Department of Buildings, who are going to have to change the way they do things now. The way the Department of Buildings works, their mission is to protect the public during construction. I respect that. What the Office of Tenant Advocate does is expand their mission to also be concerned about the tenants who have to live through construction. I haven't heard any complaints. I've only heard support from tenants about this plan.
Okay, so Mr. Raudenbush, let's stay with affordable housing. So we know that affordable housing in your district is a rare commodity. So what's the number one thing you would do as a city council member to expand the number of affordable housing units in your district?
Well, the Faustian bargain we currently have with developers over tax breaks is exactly that, a Faustian bargain. The 421A program is in desperate need of an overhaul or reform, because just to be clear, what 421A is for, for some affordable units, you get a big tax break. Well, what if I told you that there's a building going up right now along Central Park that's going to pretty much block out the sun, that took a $90 million apartment and made their property taxes go from $250,000 to $25,000. And that's under that same program of creating affordable housing. It's completely broken, and it's ridiculous. And it belies the fact that the developers are in charge at the city government level. We need to hold these developers to account. We need to go to Albany, and we need a strong and clear voice saying, there is no way that we're going to let you get away with building these buildings without building real and permanent affordable housing. And I would like to start focusing on affordable housing that we can purchase.
Councilwoman Rosenthal?
Well, I'm glad that Mr. Raudenbush brought up that example. It's certainly the one that the tenant advocates and I have been using for a very long time. That happened in 2010. Since that time, though, we've changed the zoning rules, and we've changed 421A. So one of the ways that we can bring more affordable housing to our district is through what's called ZQA, which is zoning for quality and affordability. It will most likely be used at the corner of 96th and Broadway, where Extel has purchased the Gristidi site, and more likely than not will ask for this bonus. What'll happen then is it's a 20-foot bonus. No more than that. They're not allowed to build higher than that, no matter the amount of air rights they have, and it'll bring 20% affordable housing into that building.
Okay, so this is going to be a quick yes or no answer before we get to your closing statements. Voters will be asked to vote on the proposition of holding a constitutional convention in the November election. So, this question is on the ballot every 20 years. Councilwoman Rosenthal, will you vote for holding a constitutional convention, yes or no?
I'll vote no.
Mr. Raudenbush?
I'll vote yes.
Okay. I wish we had more time to delve into it, but I will start with you. You all have 1 minute for closing statements. Councilwoman Rosenthal, we'll start with you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you again for doing this, and I'd like to thank the Democratic voters who elected me to be their nominee in this general election, and I'm asking Upper West Siders for their vote. It's incredibly important that we continue the work that my office has been doing. I'm very proud of my staff and the work that we do, reaching out and helping the tenants primarily who walk into my door, and the work that we've been doing to make government work better. We have to bring transparency to government, or to continue to do so, because that's how we can make effective public policy. The other thing I'm going to have to mention again is the number of women in the City Council. The next thing that council is going to be thinking about is who our speaker is. And I will absolutely, as co-chair of the Women's Caucus, keep any speaker's feet to the fire to make sure there are more women in leadership positions and that women are properly represented and have their voices heard in the City Council. Thank you very much. I appreciate your support.
Thank you. Mr. Raudenbush?
Well, I agree with the incumbent that having women in government is very important, and I'm very proud of the Upper West Side for having a female city council member since 1993. We're certainly a progressive district, and I think that shows through. Ultimately, when we're talking about decisions about who's going to be our representative at the local level, it's all about issues. And the structural things that we need to do to create more opportunities for women in government need to happen, but that doesn't ultimately come down to just at the ballot box to vote for somebody. We have to have the best possible leadership, period. But we need to continue to break down those barriers. My vision for the Upper West Side has everything to do with your quality of life. It's under assault, and it's under attack, and it's being bought by the highest bidder. We need to go after these developers to get a much better deal. We also need to preserve our open spaces, and I encourage the council member, and I would ask the council member, let's have more debates, let's keep this discussion going, and let's really have a discussion so we can engage this community, really get that vote total up. And only 25% of people vote in the primary. I'd like to see that at least 50. Let's really be a leader.
Great. Thank you all so much. I want to thank all the candidates for participating in today's debate. The general election will be held Tuesday, November 7th. For more information about voting, locating your poll site, and the candidates, you can visit the League of Women Voters website, lwvnyc.org. Thank you for watching Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and goodbye.